Once long ago, in the heart of a grey and gloomy valley, there stood a town called Greystone Hollow. Once vibrant and alive, it had grown silent over the years. The cobblestone streets were cracked, the houses leaned tiredly against one another, and the skies above seemed permanently cloaked in a dull, unchanging grey. Even the river that once sparkled like diamonds now flowed sluggishly, its surface as lifeless as the stones that lined its banks. In a small, crooked studio at the edge of town, there lived a young painter named Elio. His hands were stained with every colour imaginable, yet his paintings never seemed to bring life to his canvases. No matter how hard he tried, his art felt hollow, lifeless, like the town itself. Every morning, Elio would set up his easel by the window, hoping to catch even a glimpse of inspiration from the world outside. But the streets below offered little more than the sight of hunched shoulders and tired faces. The people of Greystone Hollow had forgotten how to smile, and in turn, Elio had forgotten how to dream. His mother's voice echoed in his mind often, though she had passed years ago. "A true artist paints from the heart," she used to say. But Elio didn't know how to find his heart anymore. It felt as empty as the jars of paint he left drying on the shelf. One grey evening, as Elio sat before yet another blank canvas, he overheard two townsfolk speaking outside his window. "Did you hear about the strange lights in the forest?" one whispered, leaning closer. "Strange? They say it's some kind of creature," the other replied. "Something glowing and golden, but no one dares to go near." Their words prickled something deep in Elio's chest. A glowing creature, in the forest. It sounded like nonsense, but it was more exciting than anything he had heard in years. That night, as the town settled into its usual quiet, Elio lay awake in his narrow bed. His thoughts churned like a restless sea. What if the stories were true? What if something out there, beyond the grey streets and tired faces, held the spark he had been searching for? The moon hung low and silver in the sky as Elio rose from his bed. Pulling on his threadbare coat, he grabbed a small lantern and slipped outside. The town was eerily silent, the only sound the soft crunch of his boots on the gravel path. The forest loomed ahead, its tall, dark trees swaying gently in the night wind. As he stepped into the woods, the lantern's light carved a small circle in the darkness. Shadows danced around him and the air grew thick and still. Somewhere deeper in the forest, he thought he saw a flicker of golden light, just for a moment like the blink of a firefly. "Hello?" Elio called softly, his voice trembling. The woods offered no answer, only the whisper of leaves above. But the flicker came again, brighter this time, pulling him forward like a thread tugging at his heart. He followed the glow deeper and deeper into the woods, his fear mingling with curiosity. The trees grew denser, the air colder, but the light never wavered. Finally, Elio found himself standing in a small clearing. In its centre stood the ruins of what might have once been a grand temple, now overgrown with moss and vines. And there, nestled among the broken stones, was the source of the glow, a creature unlike anything Elio had ever seen. It was small, no larger than a dog, with shimmering scales that seemed to catch the moonlight and turn it to gold. Its eyes, bright and knowing, watched him from the shadows. Tiny wings, like those of a dragonfly, twitched at its sides. Elio's breath caught. What are you?" he whispered. The creature tilted its head as if studying him. Then, to Elio's astonishment, it stepped forward. Its golden glow spread through the clearing, chasing away the shadows, until the ruins looked almost alive again. "I am Gloomy," the creature said, its voice soft but clear, as though it spoke directly into his mind. "And you are the painter who has lost his colours." Elio stared, too stunned to reply. The dragon's words wrapped around him, warm and steady. For the first time in years, he felt a spark, small but real, flicker in his chest. "Why are you here?" Elio managed to ask at last. "Why show yourself to me?" Loomy's glowing eyes seemed to smile. "Because I see the dream you've forgotten, and together we can bring it back to life." Elio didn't understand what Gloomy meant, not fully. But standing there in the golden light, he felt something he hadn't in years: hope. Chapter 2. The Whisper in the Woods. The next morning, Elio awoke with an odd sense of purpose tugging at him. The memory of the glowing creature, Gloomy it had called itself, felt like a dream. Yet the faint golden shimmer on his hands, where the creature's light had touched him, suggested otherwise. He stared at his palms for a long moment before washing them clean, the spark inside him still flickering. As he walked into town to buy supplies, whispers of the forest filled the air like threads weaving through the market square. Two merchants, their carts piled high with limp vegetables and grey-brown loaves, muttered just loud enough for others to overhear. "They say it's some kind of spirit," one said, casting a wary glance toward the forest. "A protector, maybe, or a curse." "Curse, more like," the other replied, his voice sharp. "Nothing good comes from that place. Stay away, I say." Elio hesitated by the bread stall, his fingers brushing the coins in his pocket. He'd always dismissed rumours as idle talk, the kind that bored townsfolk spun to pass their dull days. But now their words gripped him. He wanted to speak up, to say, "I saw it," but he held back, unsure if he had imagined it all. Later that evening, as the sun sank below the hills, Elio sat in his studio staring at an unfinished canvas. The painting was meant to be a meadow, soft greens, warm yellows, and a hint of blue sky. But instead it looked lifeless, flat, like every other painting he had attempted. His brush trembled in his hand. The glow from the forest lingered in his mind, calling to him. What if I go back, he thought. Perhaps Lumi's light wasn't just a trick of his imagination. Maybe it could inspire something real. As night fell, Elio's restlessness grew unbearable. Grabbing his lantern and an old satchel, he set out toward the woods. Fear gnawed at him with every step, but it was tempered by something stronger, hope. The trees loomed taller and darker as he entered the forest, their branches tangled above him, casting shadows that seemed alive. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and the faint chirp of crickets echoed through the stillness. He gripped his lantern tighter, its small flame flickering like his courage. "Lumi," he called softly, his voice barely rising above the rustling leaves. The name felt strange on his tongue, but somehow right. "Are you here?" The forest answered with silence, broken only by the occasional creak of old branches. Elio's chest tightened. Perhaps the creature had been a dream after all, a desperate illusion conjured by his weary mind. But just as he turned to leave, a faint golden glow appeared in the distance, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. His breath hitched. The light grew brighter as he approached, weaving through the trees like a thread of sunlight trapped in the night. It led him back to the clearing, the same one he had stumbled upon the night before. There, amidst the ruins, was Lumi. The dragon lay curled atop a smooth stone, its golden scales shimmering faintly. Its wings, delicate as glass, twitched as Elio stepped closer. "You came back," Lumi said, lifting its head. Its voice, though soft, filled the clearing like music. I wasn't sure if you were real," Elio admitted, setting his lantern down. "But I couldn't stop thinking about you, about your light." Lumi tilted its head, studying him. "The light you seek is not mine alone," it said. "It comes from the dreams you've buried inside you." Elio frowned. "Dreams? I don't understand." The dragon unfurled its wings, rising to its feet. Its glow brightened, casting long shadows against the ancient stones. "Dreams are what give art its power," Lumi said. "But you've lost yours, haven't you?" Elio opened his mouth to protest, but the words caught in his throat. Lumi was right. He had buried his dreams long ago, under the weight of the town's sorrow and his own failures. "I want to find them again," he whispered, his voice trembling. "But I don't know how." Lumi stepped closer, its warmth wrapping around him like a gentle flame. "Then let us find them together," it said. "But be warned, Elio, the path will not be easy. Dreams are fragile things, and the world is quick to crush them. You must be brave." Elio nodded, though his hands trembled at his sides. "I'll try," he said. The dragon's golden light flared brighter, illuminating the clearing until it felt as though the sun had risen within the forest. Elio squinted, shielding his eyes, but he couldn't look away. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of something long forgotten, something that glowed as fiercely as Lumi's light. Hope. Chapter 3. The Meeting of Fire and Brush. In the golden glow of the forest clearing, Elio stood frozen, his heart caught between awe and disbelief. Lumi moved with an almost playful grace, circling the crumbling temple stones. The dragon's scales shimmered like molten gold, and its wings, delicate as spun glass, seemed too fragile to hold such power. "You look at me as though I were a creature of myths," Gloomy said, its voice soft yet carrying a note of mischief. "But I am..." In the golden glow of the forest clearing, Elio stood frozen, his heart caught between awe and disbelief. Gloomy moved with an almost playful grace, circling the crumbling temple stones. The dragon's scales shimmered like molten gold, and its wings, delicate as spun glass, seemed too fragile to hold such power. "You look at me as though I were a creature of myths," Gloomy said, its voice soft yet carrying a note of mischief. "But I am as real as your breath, painter." Elio shook his head, gripping his satchel like it might anchor him to the earth. "I've never seen anything like you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you? How did you get here?" Gloomy paused, resting its small, glowing frame on a moss-covered stone. "I am what remains of the light in this forest," it said, its gaze sharp and unblinking. "Once this place thrived with dreams. It was a haven for creation, a wellspring of beauty. But the world outside grew dim, and the people forgot. They stopped believing in what they could not see, and so the light faded." Elio felt the weight of Gloomy's words settle over him. The town, the hollow faces, his own stagnant art, it all seemed tied to the dragon's story. "And you stayed here? Alone?" Gloomy's wings fluttered, scattering golden motes into the air. "I am the last flame of this place," it said, "bound to the dreams it once held. I cannot leave, but you..." It leaned forward, its luminous eyes narrowing. "You are different." "Me?" Elio blinked, startled. "I'm just a painter, and not even a very good one." The dragon let out a soft, rumbling laugh. "Not good? Perhaps not yet. But you have something most have lost, potential. A spark that can ignite if you are willing to fan it." Elio hesitated, glancing down at his hands. The faint memory of Gloommy's golden glow still lingered on his skin. "But I don't know how. Everything I paint feels lifeless, empty." Gloommy's eyes softened. "That is because you paint with your hands, but not your heart. Your art has no soul because you do not believe in it yourself." The words stung, but Elio couldn't argue. He had known the truth of them for years, though hearing it aloud left him raw. "Come closer," Gloomy said, motioning with a clawed paw. "Bring me something to paint on." Elio hesitated, then reached into his satchel. His fingers brushed against a small wooden panel he had brought with him, though he wasn't sure why. Pulling it out, he stepped forward and placed it gently on the stone where Gloomy perched. The dragon examined the panel with a tilt of its head. Then, with a deep inhale, Gloomy's chest glowed brighter, its golden light pooling around its throat. With a sudden, delicate exhale, Gloomy breathed a thin stream of golden fire across the panel's surface. Elio stumbled back, shielding his eyes from the brilliance. When the light dimmed, he saw the panel had transformed. No longer a blank, lifeless piece of wood, it now shimmered with a vivid, living scene. A field of wildflowers swaying in an unseen breeze, each petal so vibrant it seemed to glow from within. The sky above was a soft, endless blue, dotted with clouds that drifted lazily as though they had just been born. "It's alive!" Elio whispered, his voice trembling. He reached out but stopped short of touching it, afraid to disturb the magic. "It is a dream," Gloomy said simply, "one that I carried within me. But dreams cannot stay alive without care. That is where you come in, painter." Elio looked up, his heart pounding. "You mean you can do this for all my paintings?" Gloomy's eyes flickered with a light that was almost playful. "I can breathe life into your work, yes, but only if your heart is in it. My fire does not create, it awakens. The rest must come from you." The weight of Gloomy's words settled over Elio like a heavy cloak. For years he had longed for his art to move people, to bring them joy or comfort. But now, with the dragon's gift before him, he felt the enormity of the responsibility. "What if I fail?" he asked softly, the question barely escaping his lips. Gloomy leaned closer, its warm breath brushing against Elio's face. "Failure is part of creation, painter. To dream is to risk, to hope is to fall, and to create is to dare." Elio nodded slowly, the spark inside him growing just a little brighter. "Then let's try. Let's bring something back to life." The dragon's scales shimmered brighter in the clearing, and its wings fluttered with a sound like 1,000 whispered promises. "Very well, Elio," Gloomy said. "Together we will light the shadows." And in that moment, as the golden glow of Gloommy's fire filled the clearing once more, Elio felt something stir within him, something that had been lost but was now beginning to wake. Chapter 4: The Pact of Creation. The clearing hummed with golden light as Elio sat cross-legged on the mossy ground, staring at the enchanted painting Gloomy had breathed to life. The wildflowers seemed to sway in a soft, invisible breeze, their colours richer than anything Elio had seen in his entire life. It wasn't just a painting. It was a fragment of a dream, alive and untouchable. Elio's thoughts swirled like leaves caught in a sudden wind. "We could do this for the town," he said, his voice trembling with urgency. "For Greystone Hollow. They've forgotten what it means to hope. Maybe this could bring it back." Gloomy, perched elegantly atop a broken pillar, regarded him with a curious tilt of its head. The dragon's glow dimmed slightly, settling into a soft, steady radiance. "You speak of hope, painter, yet you carry none yourself," it said, its voice calm yet piercing. "Why now do you wish to share what you do not fully hold?" Elio opened his mouth to reply, but the words stuck. Gloomy's gaze seemed to see straight through him, peeling back the layers of doubt and weariness he had built over the years. Finally, he looked down at his hands, scarred with years of failed attempts to create something meaningful. "I don't know," he admitted at last. "But when I saw what we could do, it felt possible, like maybe I could finally give something real to the town, something that matters." Gloomy's golden eyes softened and its voice turned gentle. "A noble desire, painter. But understand this, my magic is not endless. Each dream I breathe carries a piece of me with it. If the cause is selfish, the cost is greater. For greed or vanity, my light fades quickly, but for selflessness, for hope, for joy, it burns brighter." Elio felt the weight of those words settle over him. His mind flicked back to the town, the hunched shoulders, the weary eyes, the lifeless streets. He thought of the children who never laughed, the merchants who traded in silence. Greystone Hollow was more than grey, it was broken. "Then we'll use it wisely," he said firmly, looking up at Gloomy. "For the town, for the people." The dragon regarded him for a long moment, its glowing form still as a statue. Then it dipped its head in a slow, deliberate nod. "Very well, painter. If you are true in your intent, I will lend you my light." Elio felt a strange warmth flood his chest, as though the spark inside him had finally found kindling. "How does it work?" he asked. "How do we start?" Gloomy stretched its delicate wings, the golden glow around it pulsing faintly. "You paint from your heart as you always have, but now with purpose. Each brushstroke must carry your hope, your joy, your sorrow, whatever truth lies within you. When the painting is ready, I will breathe life into it. Together we will create something more than art. We will create dreams." Elio's hands itched with anticipation. He stood, brushing moss from his knees, and reached for the satchel he had slung over a low branch. Inside were a few panels, brushes and jars of faded paint, the tools of a life he had almost given up on. "We'll start tonight," he said, pulling out a panel and setting it against a stone. "Something small, something simple, but real." Gloomy settled beside him, its light casting a soft glow over the blank surface. Elio dipped his brush into the paint, hesitating for only a moment before letting the strokes flow. He painted the river that wound through the town, a memory of how it once sparkled, long before the greyness took over. He added children playing along its banks, their faces bright with laughter, and trees bursting with vibrant blossoms. Time slipped away as Elio worked, the colours swirling together like the pieces of a forgotten song. When he finally set his brush down, the painting was far from perfect, but it felt alive in a way he hadn't experienced before. "It's ready," he said softly, stepping back. Gloomy rose, its wings unfurling with a faint shimmer. It approached the painting and examined it closely, its glowing eyes flicking over every detail. Then with a slow inhale, the dragon's chest began to glow brighter, its golden light pooling around its throat. Elio held his breath as Gloomy exhaled a thin stream of fire onto the canvas. The flames danced across the surface, and for a moment the painting burned with a blinding brilliance. When the light faded, Elio gasped. The painting had transformed. The river shimmered as though real sunlight danced on its surface. The trees swayed gently, their blossoms falling in a soft, unseen breeze. The children's laughter was silent, but their joy seemed to radiate from the canvas, filling the clearing with warmth. "It's beautiful," Elio whispered. When the light faded, Elio gasped. The painting had transformed. The river shimmered as though real sunlight danced on its surface. The trees swayed gently, their blossoms falling in a soft, unseen breeze. The children's laughter was silent, but their joy seemed to radiate from the canvas, filling the clearing with warmth. "It's beautiful," Elio whispered. Gloomy stepped back, its glow dimming slightly. "It is a good beginning," the dragon said. "But remember, painter, this gift comes with a cost. Use it wisely." Elio nodded, clutching the painting to his chest. "We'll bring it to the square tomorrow," he said. "Let the town see it. Let them remember." As Gloomy curled up to rest, its light flickering faintly, Elio sat beside it, staring at the painting in his hands. For the first time in years, he felt like he had created something that truly mattered. The weight of the dragon's warning lingered in his mind, but so did the promise of what they could achieve together. Hope, it seemed, was beginning to take root in Greystone Hollow. Chapter 5. The First Masterpiece. The morning sun peeked through the grey veil of clouds over Greystone Hollow as Elio stood in the square, his heart pounding against his ribs. His hands gripped the edges of the wooden frame that cradled their painting, the one he and Gloomy had poured themselves into through the long hours of the night. Before him stretched the heart of the town, a space once filled with bustling markets and laughter, but now lifeless. The cobblestones, worn and cracked, bore the weight of weary footsteps, and the air was thick with a silence that clung to everything like dust. Elio's breath trembled as he glanced down at the painting in his hands. It was unlike anything he had ever created. The scene was a vision of Greystone Hollow, as it had been in its brightest days. The square was alive with vivid stalls overflowing with goods, children chasing one another through a sea of wildflowers, and neighbours chatting with smiles so radiant they seemed to glow. Even the sky above, painted in layers of blue and gold, seemed to hum with life. "Are you ready?" Gloomy's soft voice drifted through his mind. The dragon, hidden in the folds of Elio's satchel to avoid prying eyes, radiated a faint warmth, a comforting reminder of its presence. "I don't know," Elio admitted under his breath. His gaze swept over the handful of townsfolk milling about, their faces heavy with the weight of routine. "What if they don't believe? What if it's not enough?" "Belief is not given freely," Gloomy replied. "It must be kindled. Let the light of the painting do the work." Elio swallowed hard and stepped into the square. At first, no one noticed him. The merchants muttered over their stalls, exchanging goods that barely seemed worth the trouble. A group of children sat in the shadow of a crumbling fountain, their games listless and silent. Even the wind seemed uninterested, stirring only to carry the faint sighs of the townsfolk. But then Elio climbed onto the base of the fountain, setting the painting against its weathered stone. Its colours glinted faintly in the dull light, catching the corner of a merchant's eye. The man paused mid-transaction, frowning as he squinted at the image. A moment later, another turned, then another, until a small crowd had begun to form. "What is this?" one of the merchants asked, stepping closer. His voice carried a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Elio took a deep breath, his voice steady despite the storm of nerves inside him. "It's the town," he said. "Or what it used to be. Do you remember?" The crowd grew, murmurs rippling through the square as more faces turned toward the painting. For a long moment there was only silence as the townsfolk stared. And then something strange began to happen. A soft golden warmth spread from the painting, subtle at first but growing in strength. It rolled through the square like a tide, brushing against every face, every heart. The colours of the painting seemed to shift and shimmer, alive with a light that pulsed gently, drawing the eye deeper into the scene. An older woman gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "The market," she whispered. "I used to sell flowers here. I can smell them." A young boy, his eyes wide, tugged on his father's sleeve. "Look, Papa, the children are playing just like we used to." The father stared, his brow furrowed as though grasping at a memory just out of reach. Slowly, a smile crept across his face, a small, tentative thing, but real. The crowd pressed closer, their expressions shifting as the warmth of the painting touched them. Elio watched in awe as faces softened, shoulders straightened, and voices rose in quiet wonder. Even the children by the fountain stirred, their eyes lighting up as if they were seeing colour for the first time. "It's beautiful," someone murmured. "Did you make this?" another asked, turning to Elio. I painted it," Elio admitted, his cheeks flushing. "But it's not just mine, it's yours too, it's the town's." The murmurs grew louder, a ripple of excitement spreading through the square. For the first time in years, Greystone Hollow felt alive, not with the clamour of daily toil, but with the hum of something deeper: hope. From within the satchel, Lumi's voice came softly, meant only for Elio. "Do you see? This is what dreams can do." Elio nodded, his throat tight. He had painted countless works in his life, but none had ever mattered like this. The painting wasn't just a picture, it was a piece of the town's soul brought back to life. As the golden warmth continued to radiate, the people began to talk, their voices lively and bright. Plans for cleaning the square, reviving the market, and mending the broken fountain filled the air. The change was small, a flicker of light in a sea of grey, but it was real. It was enough. As the crowd thinned and the sun dipped lower, Elio carefully lifted the painting, cradling it like something fragile. A few townsfolk stopped to thank him, their smiles tentative but genuine. It was more than he had hoped for. "You did well," Lumi said softly as Elio carried the painting home. "But this is only the beginning." Elio smiled, his heart full. "Then let's keep going," he said. "Let's paint the town alive again." And as the golden light of the painting faded into the quiet evening, the spark of hope it had kindled remained, glowing in the hearts of Greystone Hollow. Chapter 6. The Weight of Expectations. The next morning, Greystone Hollow was alive in a way it hadn't been for years. The streets buzzed with voices, and neighbours who had once passed each other in silence now exchanged smiles and conversations. It was as if a golden thread had been woven through the town, pulling it. The next morning, Greystone Hollow was alive in a way it hadn't been for years. The streets buzzed with voices, and neighbours who had once passed each other in silence now exchanged smiles and conversations. It was as if a golden thread had been woven through the town, pulling its people closer together. And at the centre of it all was the painting. The vision of the town's brighter days now hung proudly in the market square. Townsfolk came and went, lingering before the artwork as though basking in the light of an old friend. Children pointed at the lively river and whispered stories of the games they imagined playing along its banks. Elders stood quietly, their eyes brimming with memories stirred by the scene's vivid warmth. But with the admiration came expectation. "Elio!" a voice called, cutting through the chatter. "You must make one for the church." "And for the school," another added. "The children need something to lift their spirits." A merchant tugged at Elio's sleeve. "If you painted my stall, it'd bring in more customers for sure. What do you say?" Elio's heart raced as he stood in the square, surrounded by eager faces. His agreement to make more paintings had barely left his lips before requests poured in like a flood. Everyone wanted a piece of the magic, a fragment of the hope that had returned to Greystone Hollow. He carried the weight of their excitement back to his studio, his mind a storm of thoughts. The satchel at his side shifted, and Lumi's voice floated out, soft but steady. "They ask much of you, painter." "I know," Elio muttered, setting the satchel on the floor. "But can you blame them? It's been so long since anyone here felt alive. They just want to hold on to it." Lumi climbed out of the bag, its glow dimmer than usual, though Elio didn't notice at first. "Hope is a fragile thing," the dragon said, curling atop a pile of unused canvases. "If you try to spread it too thin, it may break." Elio barely heard the warning. His mind was already churning with ideas for the paintings he would create. He pulled out a canvas and began sketching furiously. A church bathed in golden light, children playing in a meadow, a bustling market filled with laughter. Days turned into a blur as Elio painted tirelessly. Lumi sat beside him, its golden breath transforming each canvas into something more than art. The scenes shimmered and glowed, carrying fragments of the dragon's light and Elio's hope. Each finished piece was greeted with awe and gratitude from the townsfolk, and the once dreary streets of Greystone Hollow began to hum with life. But as the paintings multiplied, so did the demands.
"Elio, you forgot about the bakery!" cried one voice.
"And the bridge!" shouted another. "What about the mill?" someone else chimed in. The requests piled up, each one more insistent than the last. Elio found himself working late into the night, his hands trembling from exhaustion. The studio, once a place of quiet creativity, now felt suffocating. He glanced at Gloomy, who sat slumped in the corner, its glow faint and flickering. "Gloomy?" Elio asked, concern creeping into his voice. "Are you all right?" The dragon lifted its head slowly, its movements sluggish. "I warned you, painter," it said softly. "My fire is not infinite. Every breath I give weakens me." Elio's chest tightened. He had noticed the change, but pushed it aside, too focused on meeting the town's demands. "You should have told me sooner," he said, guilt creeping into his tone. "I did," Gloomy replied, its voice tinged with weariness. "But you did not listen." Elio sank into his chair, his head in his hands. The weight of the town's expectations pressed down on him like a heavy stone. He thought of the faces in the square, bright with hope, and the light in Gloomy's eyes, now dim and struggling. Was he doing the right thing, or was he pushing too far? "We need to stop," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "At least for now. You need to rest." Gloomy tilted its head, studying him with a faint glimmer of approval. "It is not wrong to give, painter, but even the brightest flame needs time to recover." The next day, Elio returned to the square, his hands empty. The townsfolk crowded around him, their voices rising with questions and requests.
"Where's the next painting, Elio?"
"You didn't forget the mill, did you? When will you finish the one for the school?" Elio raised his hands, silencing the crowd. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice steady but firm. "There won't be any new paintings for now. Gloomy needs time to recover, and I can't create anything meaningful if I'm rushing." The crowd murmured in disappointment, but Elio held his ground. "I promise we'll make more, but they need to matter. They need to come from the right place." Some nodded in understanding, while others grumbled and turned away. Elio returned to his studio feeling both relieved and anxious. He glanced at Gloomy, who had curled into a small glowing ball on the windowsill. "Rest," Elio said softly, his voice carrying a mix of gratitude and guilt. "We'll make this right, together." As the dragon's breathing slowed and its light steadied, Elio stared at his unfinished canvases, his mind turning over a question that refused to let him go. How do you create hope without losing yourself in the process? It was a question he would have to answer before they began again. Chapter 7. The Shadows of Greed. The studio door rattled violently under the weight of an impatient knock. Elio set his brush down with a sigh, the canvas before him still bare. Days of rest had done little to ease the knot of tension in his chest. Gloomy lay curled on the windowsill, its glow faint but steady, recovering slowly from the strain of their last creations. The knock came again, louder this time. "Elio, open up, boy!" a booming voice called from outside. Elio frowned, wiping his hands on a rag before crossing the room. He pulled open the door to reveal Marius, the wealthiest merchant in Greystone Hollow, standing with his chest puffed out like a rooster. His fine coat, embroidered with gold thread, stretched tightly over his large frame. Behind him, two servants stood holding a heavy chest, its iron hinges glinting in the pale morning light. "Elio, my lad," Marius began, his voice slick with false warmth. "Word around town is that you're the miracle worker behind those magical paintings." Elio stiffened, glancing over Marius's shoulder at the curious onlookers lingering in the street. "I'm just a painter," he replied, keeping his tone measured. "The paintings are special, yes, but they're meant to bring hope to the town." "Exactly," Marius said, clapping Elio on the shoulder with a hand weighed down by rings. "And that's why I've come to you. You see, I have a proposition, one that will benefit us both." Elio stepped back, his instincts prickling. "What kind of proposition?" Marius gestured to the chest. "A painting, of course. Something grand, something worthy of my station. A portrait, perhaps, to hang in my hall. Or better yet, a scene depicting my contributions to Greystone Hollow. A monument to my legacy, if you will. Elio's stomach tightened. He thought of Lumi's warning. Each dream I breathe carries a piece of me with it. If the cause is selfish, the cost is greater. I'm not sure that's possible, Elio said carefully. Lumi's magic is meant for the town, not for personal gain. Marius's smile faltered and a shadow crossed his face. Nonsense, he said with a dismissive wave. You've done plenty for the town already. Surely you can spare a little magic for someone who's kept this place afloat. My wealth has funded half the businesses here, and don't think I haven't noticed your studio stands on my land. Elio's jaw tightened. It's not about sparing magic, he said firmly. Lumi's power isn't limitless, it needs to be used wisely. Marius's expression darkened, his affable mask slipping to reveal something colder. You'd refuse me? After all I've done for this town, for you? Elio hesitated, the weight of the merchant's gaze pressing down on him. Marius wasn't wrong. His wealth had kept Greystone Hollow from collapsing entirely during its darkest days. But Elio couldn't shake the image of Lumi, its light flickering as it gave more than it could afford. I'm sorry, Elio said at last, his voice steady but quiet. I can't do it. Marius's face turned red and his voice dropped to a dangerous growl. Think carefully, boy. You're just a painter, a nobody. My patronage could make you a legend, or I could make you irrelevant. Elio felt the threat like a blade at his throat, but he stood his ground. I appreciate your support, he said, meeting Marius's glare, but Lumi's magic isn't for sale. Marius stared at him for a long, tense moment before letting out a bitter laugh. Very well, he said, his voice dripping with contempt, but don't think this is the end of it. You'll see, Elio. When the world forgets you, you'll wish you'd accepted my offer. With that, Marius turned sharply, his servants following behind with the unopened chest. The door slammed shut, leaving Elio alone in the studio, his heart pounding. From the windowsill, Lumi stirred, its faint glow illuminating the shadows in the room. You did well, painter, it said softly. Greed is a hungry flame. It would have consumed us both. Elio sank into a chair, his hands trembling. I didn't do it for me, he murmured. But what if he's right? What if I've made an enemy I can't afford to have? Lumi's golden eyes shimmered faintly. The cost of holding to your purpose is often steep, but the cost of abandoning it is greater. Elio nodded, though the weight of the encounter lingered. He glanced at the empty canvas before him, his resolve hardening. Marius's greed had cast a shadow, but Elio knew where his light belonged. Then we'll keep going, he said quietly, picking up his brush. Not for him, for them. As the brush touched the canvas, Lumi's light grew a little brighter, steady and reassuring. Together they would carry on, even as the shadows gathered around them. Chapter 8. The Shattered Canvas. Elio stared at the blank canvas for hours, his hand trembling over the palette. Marius's words haunted him like a lingering shadow, twisting through his thoughts. Refusing the merchant's request had felt right at the time, but the consequences had come swiftly. Already the rumours had begun to swirl, whispers in the market, muttered accusations that Elio and Lumi were hoarding their magic for their own gain. That morning, a boy had run to his studio with a message scrawled in bold, angry letters. Who are you to decide who deserves hope? The weight of those words had driven him to pick up his brush, despite everything. Marius's influence stretched across the town, and his anger could unravel the fragile hope Elio and Lumi had worked so hard to rekindle. If one painting could quiet the storm, could it truly be so wrong? When Lumi stirred from the windowsill, its light faint and flickering, Elio avoided the dragon's gaze. I'm going to do it, he said at last, his voice heavy. The painting for Marius, just this one. Lumi watched him in silence for a long moment before speaking. You do not believe in it? I don't have to, Elio snapped, the frustration bubbling over. It's not about me, Lumi. If I don't do this, the town will turn on us. They'll lose faith. The dragon's golden eyes dimmed. Faith built on falsehoods will crumble, painter. You know this. Elio didn't answer, he couldn't. Instead, he turned back to the canvas and began to paint. The image took shape over the course of 2 days. Elio painted Marius as the merchant had demanded, grand and imposing, standing at the centre of a lavish market square. Around him, merchants piled their carts high with gold and jewels, and the townsfolk looked up at him with awe and gratitude. Every detail was rendered with precision, but as Elio worked, the colours seemed to grow duller beneath his brush. No matter how much he adjusted the strokes, the scene refused to come alive. "It's done," he muttered on the second evening, stepping back to examine the finished piece. His heart sank as he looked at it. The painting felt wrong. It lacked the warmth, the magic, the soul that had made his other works glow with life. Gloomy approached the canvas slowly, its wings dragging slightly on the floor. "This is not a dream," the dragon said, its voice barely above a whisper. "It is a shadow." Elio turned away, guilt clawing at his chest. "It doesn't matter, we need to finish it. Just breathe into it, Gloomy, please." Gloomy hesitated, its glow flickering weakly. "This will hurt us both." "Just do it," Elio said, his voice breaking. "We don't have a choice." The dragon inhaled deeply, its chest pulsing faintly with light. When Gloomy exhaled, the stream of golden fire licked across the canvas, illuminating it for a brief, blinding moment. But instead of the vibrant warmth that had marked their earlier works, the light faded quickly, leaving the painting dull and lifeless. The figures on the canvas seemed flat, their eyes empty. Gloomy staggered backward, its glow nearly extinguished. Elio rushed forward, catching the small dragon as it collapsed into his arms. Its body felt lighter than ever, its scales cool to the touch. "Gloomy!" Elio cried, his voice cracking. "What's happening?" The dragon's breathing was shallow, its golden eyes dimmed to a faint amber. "The fire was wasted," it murmured. "A dream cannot be born from greed." Panic surged through Elio. He laid Gloomy carefully on the windowsill, its form barely visible in the growing darkness. "I'll fix it," he whispered, though the words felt hollow. "I'll make it right." Gloomy's eyes fluttered closed. "The canvas is shattered, painter. The light must rest." Elio turned back to the painting, his hands clenched into fists. It stared back at him, lifeless and cold, a mockery of the hope he had once brought to the town. The figures of Marius and the townsfolk felt hollow, their smiles forced, their joy false. Even the colours seemed muted, drained of their vibrancy. A knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. Marius's voice boomed from the other side, eager and insistent. "Elio, is it finished?" Elio froze, his breath caught in his throat. He looked back at Gloomy, lying motionless on the sill, its faint light barely flickering. "Elio!" Marius shouted again, louder this time. "You'd better not have wasted my time." Anger flared in Elio's chest. Anger at Marius, at himself, at the whole twisted situation. Without thinking, he grabbed the canvas and threw open the door. Marius stood there, his expression a mixture of smugness and impatience, flanked by his ever-present servants. "Here," Elio said, thrusting the painting forward. His voice was sharp, his hands trembling. "Take it!" Marius's eyes lit up as he studied the piece. He didn't seem to notice or care about its lifelessness. "Excellent," he said with a satisfied grin. "This will do nicely." Elio didn't wait for thanks. He slammed the door and leaned against it, his chest heaving. Guilt churned in his stomach as he turned back to Gloomy, who lay unmoving on the windowsill. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I should have listened." The studio fell silent, the air heavy with regret. The painting was gone, but its shadow lingered, stretching over Elio and Gloomy like a dark cloud. For the first time, Elio wondered if the hope they had kindled could ever be rebuilt, or if it had already burned away. Chapter 9, A Flicker of Hope. The studio was eerily quiet. Gloomy lay motionless on the windowsill, its glow dim and faint as a candle guttering in the wind. Elio sat beside it, his head in his hands. The aftermath of the painting for Marius weighed on him like a stone. Every glance at the empty canvases leaning against the walls felt like a reminder of his failure, his betrayal of the magic they'd created together. For 2 days, Elio barely left Gloomy's side. He brought water and food he knew the dragon didn't need, whispering apologies it couldn't answer. At night, he sat in the studio's corner, staring at the stars through the cracked window, wondering if Lumi's light would ever return. On the third morning, as the town stirred outside, Lumi finally opened its eyes. The faint amber glow had returned to its scales, and its voice, though weak, broke the silence. "Why do you look at me with such sorrow, painter?" Lumi asked, its tone gentle but strained. Elio's throat tightened. "I should have listened to you. I thought I was doing the right thing, but all I did was make things worse. I let Marius's greed, my own fear, twist what we were trying to do." Lumi shifted slightly, its wings dragging against the sill. "You let the shadows guide your brush," it said, "but the light is not lost." "How can you say that?" Elio asked, his voice breaking. "You nearly—" He couldn't finish the thought, the memory of Lumi collapsing too raw to put into words. The dragon tilted its head, studying him with tired but steady eyes. "The fire dims, but it does not die. You must remember, painter, why you picked up the brush in the first place." Elio's shoulders slumped as Lumi's words sank in. For years he had painted to escape the town's greyness, to chase a beauty he felt he could never truly reach. But when Lumi's light had entered his life, everything had changed. The purpose of his art had shifted from creating for himself to creating for others. And yet, in trying to meet their demands, he had lost that purpose. He sat in silence for a long time, staring at the scattered paints and brushes on the studio floor. Slowly, an idea began to take shape, fragile at first, but growing stronger with each breath. "I know what I need to do," he said softly, his voice firm with newfound resolve. He turned to Lumi, his hands trembling. "We need one last painting, something bigger than anything we've done before. Not for Marius, not for the town's demands, but for the heart of Greystone Hollow itself." Elio's shoulders slumped as Lumi's words sank in. For years he had painted to escape the town's greyness, to chase a beauty he felt he could never truly reach. But when Lumi's light had entered his life, everything had changed. The purpose of his art had shifted from creating for himself to creating for others. And yet, in trying to meet their demands, he had lost that purpose. He sat in silence for a long time, staring at the scattered paints and brushes on the studio floor. Slowly, an idea began to take shape, fragile at first, but growing stronger with each breath. "I know what I need to do," he said softly, his voice firm with newfound resolve. He turned to Lumi, his hands trembling. "We need one last painting, something bigger than anything we've done before. Not for Marius, not for the town's demands, but for the heart of Greystone Hollow itself." Lumi's glow flickered faintly as though stirred by the conviction in his voice. "A painting born of truth," it said, "not of greed or fear." Elio nodded. He could see it in his mind, a painting that would capture the town's story, its struggles, its hopes, and its forgotten light. It would be a gift, not a product, a reminder of who they were and who they could be again. He moved quickly, clearing a space in the center of the studio. He dragged his largest canvas into the light and began sketching with broad, confident strokes. The image flowed from him as though it had been waiting all along. The people of Greystone Hollow, not as they were now, but as they had been, and as they could be again. The square at its heart brimmed with life, its market stalls vibrant and overflowing. Children played beneath blooming trees, while neighbours stood together, laughing and talking. The old mill churned in the distance, the river sparkled, and above it all the sky glowed with colours that felt alive. Elio painted with an urgency he hadn't felt in years. He worked through the day and into the night, his brush flying across the canvas. Lumi watched from the windowsill, its glow growing slightly brighter with each passing hour. As dawn broke, the painting was nearly complete. Elio stepped back, his hands trembling, and wiped the sweat from his brow. The canvas before him felt alive in a way he couldn't fully explain, but it was missing something, the final spark that only Lumi could give. He turned to the dragon, his voice soft but steady. "Can you do it?" Lumi rose slowly, its golden light flickering but determined. "This painting carries the truth of the town," it said. "Its fire will not burn for nothing." Elio lifted the canvas into place, steadying it against the wall. Lumi approached, its glow intensifying as it took a deep breath. The dragon's chest pulsed with light, brighter and brighter, until it exhaled a stream of golden fire that danced across the painting's surface. The light rippled through the canvas, igniting the colours and bringing the scene to life. The trees swayed, the river sparkled, and the figures of the townsfolk seemed to breathe with warmth and joy. The sky above glowed with a brilliance that spilled into the room, filling the studio with a warmth that Elio felt deep in his chest. Gloomy staggered, its light dimming again, but this time Elio caught it before it could fall. The dragon's voice was faint but steady. "The fire has found its home." Elio looked at the painting, tears streaming down his face. It wasn't just a work of art. It was a gift, a reminder, and a promise all at once. He knew then that this was what their work had always been meant for. Not fame or fortune, but to bring light where it was most needed. "We'll show them," he whispered, cradling Gloomy in his arms. "We'll bring it to the square and we'll remind them who they are." And as Gloommy's faint glow warmed his hands, Elio felt a flicker of hope rekindle in his heart. Chapter 10. The Great Tapestry. The square buzzed with quiet excitement as the townsfolk gathered. Word had spread quickly of Elio's new painting, the one that now stood in the heart of Greystone Hollow, alive with warmth and beauty. It had rekindled something in the people, an ember of pride, a flicker of belonging, but for Elio it was only the beginning. That night, as the square emptied and the stars spread their light over the sleeping town, Elio returned to his studio. Gloomy rested in a makeshift bed of fabric scraps, its glow faint but steady. The dragon's breaths were shallow but even, its form recovering from the toll of their last creation. Elio knelt beside it, his voice quiet. "We need one more painting, Gloomy, the biggest one yet." The dragon's eyes flickered open, golden and soft. "Another painting, painter. You've already given so much." Elio shook his head, his gaze distant as he imagined the vision in his mind. The town isn't just one moment or one memory, it's all of them. Every hope, every dream, every sorrow and joy. We've brought them pieces of light, but now we need to give them the whole story. Something they can carry with them, no matter how dark things get. Gloomy was silent for a long moment, then stretched its delicate wings. "A mural," it said at last, its voice thoughtful. "A tapestry of their hearts." Elio nodded, determination tightening his jaw. "We'll need the entire wall in the square, the one everyone passes on market days. It has to be something they can't ignore." The next morning, Elio stood before the crumbling wall that bordered the square. Its surface was cracked and uneven, its grey stones stained with years of neglect. But in it, Elio saw possibility. As the townsfolk began to gather, their faces curious, Elio stepped forward. "I need your help," he said, his voice carrying across the square. "This wall belongs to all of us, and this painting will be for all of us." A murmur ran through the crowd, but one by one, hands went up in agreement. The baker offered flour sacks to clean the surface. The mason brought tools to patch the cracks. Even the children pitched in, scrubbing and smoothing the stones with laughter that echoed through the square. By the time the sun dipped low, the wall stood ready, a blank canvas waiting for its story. The next few weeks were a blur of colour and motion. Elio began at dawn each day, his brushes flying across the surface as the townsfolk gathered to watch. The mural stretched wider and taller than anything he had ever attempted. It started with the town's origins, a small settlement nestled in the valley, surrounded by blooming fields and bright skies. As the days passed, the painting grew to include the market square alive with bustling stalls, the mill churning in the distance, and the river winding its way through the scene. Elio didn't just paint what he saw, he painted what the town had lost and what it could become again. Every figure in the mural was someone from Greystone Hollow. The baker, the blacksmith, the children chasing one another, the elders sitting beneath the shade of a great oak. Gloomy watched from its perch on the scaffolding, its glow brightening with each new section. Though the work demanded much from Elio, the dragon's presence was a constant reassurance. "Each stroke carries their dreams," Gloomy said one evening, its voice warm with pride, "and with every dream the fire burns brighter." Elio smiled, though his hands were raw from hours of painting. "This is what we were meant to do," he said, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. As the mural neared completion, Elio faced its most ambitious section, the sky. He wanted it to glow with the colours of dawn, each hue symbolising the town's resilience. He climbed the highest scaffolding, his brush trembling as he reached the wall's topmost corner. "You can do this," Lumi said, perched beside him. Its golden light illuminated the paints, making them shimmer like molten gold. The sky carries their hope. Elio took a deep breath and began to paint. The strokes came slowly at first, each one deliberate and careful, but soon his hand moved with a confidence he hadn't felt in years. The sky unfolded in waves of colour, soft pinks, warm oranges, and deep blues blending seamlessly into one another. It wasn't just a backdrop, it was a promise of brighter days. When the final stroke was complete, Elio stepped back, his chest heaving. The mural stretched across the entire wall, a living tapestry of the town's past, present, and future. The figures seemed to move, their faces glowing with joy. The river sparkled, the market hummed, and the sky above radiated a warmth that felt almost real. Lumi took its place at Elio's side, its light brighter than it had been in weeks. "You have given them a mirror, painter, a reflection of who they are and who they can become." The unveiling of the mural drew every soul in Greystone Hollow. As the crowd gathered in the square, Elio stood before the painting, his heart pounding with a mixture of pride and nervousness. When the first rays of sunlight struck the wall, the mural came alive. The colours shimmered, and the figures seemed to breathe. A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of awe. Tears welled in the eyes of the elders, and the children cheered, pointing at their likenesses in the scene. "It's beautiful," someone whispered. "It's us," another said, their voice trembling. The warmth of the mural spilled into the square, spreading like sunlight on a winter morning. The townsfolk began to talk, not just about the painting, but about plans for rebuilding the mill, reviving the market, and planting new trees along the riverbank. Elio stood silently, watching as the town came alive in ways he had only dreamed. Lumi's light glowed softly beside him, its warmth steady and reassuring. "You've done well, painter," the dragon said. "But this is not just your work, it belongs to them now." Elio nodded, a smile breaking across his face. For the first time, he felt not just like an artist, but like a part of something greater. And as the sun set over Greystone Hollow, the mural stood as a testament to the town's spirit, a great tapestry of hope, woven from the dreams of its people. Chapter 11. The Sacrifice of Light. Elio worked tirelessly as the final days of the mural stretched before him. The towering wall in Greystone Hollow Square had become a living story, capturing the town's essence in colours that seemed to pulse with life. Yet he knew it wasn't quite finished. There was one piece left, one final spark that would bring it all together. Lumi sat perched on the scaffolding beside him, its golden light brighter than it had been in weeks. The dragon had grown quieter, more introspective, as though conserving its strength. Elio noticed how its wings drooped slightly, how its breathing seemed heavier with each passing day. A knot of worry tightened in his chest, but he said nothing. Lumi had already given so much. As night fell over the town, Elio stood before the mural, studying it under the faint glow of the moon. The townsfolk had gone home, leaving the square in peaceful silence. Lumi moved to his side, its small frame shimmering like molten gold in the dark. "It's almost there," Elio murmured, his voice tinged with both pride and exhaustion. "But it's missing something." "The light," Lumi said softly. "The fire to bind it together. You've painted their hopes, their dreams, but dreams alone are fragile. They need to believe." Elio turned to Lumi, his heart sinking as he saw the weariness in the dragon's eyes. "Lumi, you've already done so much. I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking," Lumi interrupted, its voice steady despite its fading glow. "This is what I was meant for, painter. To kindle the light within others. To remind them of what they've forgotten." "But what will happen to you?" Elio asked, his voice breaking. "I can't lose you." Lumi's golden eyes softened, its glow flickering like a dying flame. "Light cannot be lost, Elio. It only changes. When the fire burns out, its warmth remains." Elio's hands clenched at his sides, his chest tightening with helplessness. He wanted to argue, to refuse, but deep down he knew Lumi was right. The mural wasn't just his creation. It was Lumi's gift to the town, the culmination of everything they had worked for. "Then let's finish it," Elio said finally, his voice trembling. "Together." The next morning, as the sun began to rise, Elio and Lumi stood before the mural for the last time. The townsfolk gathered behind them, murmuring with anticipation. The wall, though magnificent, still felt incomplete, its colours vivid but unbound, its story yearning for the final touch that would bring it to life. Lumi turned to Elio, its light growing brighter with each passing moment. "It's time." The dragon rose into the air, its wings unfurling with a brilliance that silenced the crowd. Gasps echoed through the square as Lumi ascended, its golden glow spreading like a second sunrise. Elio stepped back, his heart pounding as he watched the dragon hover before the mural. With a deep inhale, Lumi's chest swelled with radiant light, brighter than anything Elio had ever seen. Then with one powerful exhale, the dragon released a stream of golden fire that swept across the wall. The flames danced over the mural, igniting its colours and weaving them together with a brilliance that made the air hum with energy. The painting came alive. The river sparkled, its water flowing with a lifelike shimmer. The trees swayed gently, their blossoms falling in an invisible breeze. The market square bustled with movement, the figures of the townsfolk radiating warmth and joy. Above it all, the sky glowed with hues of dawn and dusk, a tapestry of light that seemed to stretch beyond the wall itself. The crowd fell silent, their faces illuminated by the mural's glow. Tears streamed down the cheeks of the elders, and the children's laughter rang out like bells. The air was filled with a warmth that seeped into every heart, a reminder of the light they had once thought lost. As the last embers of Lumi's fire settled into the mural, the dragon's form began to fade. Its golden scales shimmered one final time, and its wings, delicate as glass, dissolved into a trail of light. Elio rushed forward, his hand outstretched, but Lumi's voice stopped him. "Do not grieve, painter," it said, its voice faint but serene. "The fire lives on in your art in their hearts." Elio fell to his knees, his chest heaving with a mix of sorrow and gratitude. The trail of light lingered for a moment, tracing the air like a fleeting memory, before fading into the dawn. The townsfolk surrounded Elio, their voices rising in awe and wonder. They didn't notice the tears streaming down his face, nor the empty space where Lumi had once been. All they saw was the mural, a living testament to the town's spirit, a masterpiece that would inspire generations to come. "Elio," the baker said, his voice trembling, it's a gift. You've given us something we'll never forget." Elio wiped his face, forcing a small smile. "It wasn't just me," he said softly. "It was Lumi." The crowd murmured, exchanging puzzled glances. Some spoke of the glowing dragon they thought they'd glimpsed, while others dismissed it as a trick of the light. But Elio knew the truth. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the mural in its golden rays, Elio felt a strange sense of peace. Lumi's light was gone, but its warmth remained, not just in the mural, but in the hearts of Greystone Hollow. The painter stood, his shoulders heavy with loss, but his heart alive with purpose. The town's story wasn't over, and neither was his. Lumi's sacrifice had given them something more than hope. It had given them the strength to believe. And as Elio turned to face the crowd, he knew that the fire they had kindled together would never truly fade. Chapter 12. The Legacy of Dreams. The town of Greystone Hollow was no longer a place of grey. The transformation wasn't sudden, hope rarely moves at such a pace, but it was steady and undeniable. The square, once lifeless and cracked, now bustled with colour and purpose. The market stalls were full, their tables laden with fresh bread, ripe fruits and handcrafted wares. Laughter spilled into the air as children ran through streets adorned with flowers. Even the river seemed to sparkle more brightly, its waters flowing with a rhythm that mirrored the town's newfound vibrancy. At the heart of it all stood the mural, a living testament to the town's journey. Every morning the townsfolk gathered to marvel at its shifting light. It wasn't just a painting, it was a reminder of their strength, their dreams and the small... The town of Greystone Hollow was no longer a place of grey. The transformation wasn't sudden, hope rarely moves at such a pace, but it was steady and undeniable. The square, once lifeless and cracked, now bustled with colour and purpose. The market stalls were full, their tables laden with fresh bread, ripe fruits, and handcrafted wares. Laughter spilled into the air as children ran through streets adorned with flowers. Even the river seemed to sparkle more brightly, its waters flowing with a rhythm that mirrored the town's newfound vibrancy. At the heart of it all stood the mural, a living testament to the town's journey. Every morning, the townsfolk gathered to marvel at its shifting light. It wasn't just a painting, it was a reminder of their strength, their dreams, and the small dragon whose fire had reignited their spirits. Elio stood before the mural one quiet evening, the square empty except for the flicker of lanterns. His brushes and paints rested in a bag slung over his shoulder, their weight comforting. He ran his fingers over the rough stone wall, tracing the swirls of colour and light that seemed to hum beneath his touch. "You'd be proud of them, Gloomy," he murmured, his voice carried away by the gentle breeze. "They're building something beautiful." The dragon's absence was a hollow space in Elio's chest, but it wasn't a void. Gloomy's sacrifice had left behind something greater, a warmth that lived in every corner of the town and in every stroke of Elio's brush. He hadn't stopped painting, not for a moment. Gloomy's light still burned within him, guiding his hand as he created new works for the people of Greystone Hollow. Each painting told a story: the miller's pride in rebuilding his wheel, the children's joy as they splashed in the river, the blacksmith's quiet strength as she shaped iron into art. Elio painted their dreams, their laughter, their sorrows, all of it imbued with a faint golden glow that seemed to shimmer just beneath the surface. The townsfolk often remarked on the strange warmth in his paintings, how they felt alive in a way no other art could. Elio only smiled, his heart heavy with gratitude. He knew the truth. Gloomy's spirit lingered, not in some grand visible way, but in the quiet magic of his work. The dragon's fire was in every brushstroke, every hue, every whisper of light. As the years passed, Greystone Hollow grew into a beacon for travellers. People from distant towns came to see the mural, drawn by stories of its living light. The square flourished, its market growing to rival those of great cities. The once grey town became a place of colour and connection, where neighbours worked together and dreams flourished. Elio's studio, nestled at the edge of the square, became a gathering place. Children sat on the floor, their hands smudged with paint, as Elio taught them the joy of creation. The townsfolk brought their stories, their memories, their hopes, and Elio painted them all one by one onto canvases that adorned every home, shop and hall. The mural, though, remained the town's heart. Over time, it began to change in subtle ways. The river seemed to ripple differently, the sky shifted with the seasons, and new figures appeared among the painted townsfolk. Some said it was just a trick of the light, but others swore it was Gloomy's gift, alive and watching over them. One quiet evening, Elio stood before the mural again, his hair streaked with grey and his hands worn from years of painting. The square was empty, the lanterns casting a soft glow on the familiar scene. He placed his hand on the wall, the rough stone warm beneath his touch. As he stood there, he felt something, a faint flicker like a breath of warmth against his palm. He closed his eyes, a smile breaking across his face. "You're still here, aren't you?" he whispered. The breeze shifted, carrying with it a soft golden glow that danced briefly across the mural before fading into the night. Elio didn't need more than that. He knew. The legacy of Gloomy's light lived on, not just in the mural, but in the hearts of Greystone Hollow and the brushstrokes of a painter who had once thought his dreams were lost. Elio turned and walked back to his studio, his bag of paint swaying gently at his side. Inside, a blank canvas waited, and as he set it on the easel, his hands moved with a certainty that came not from skill but from faith. He dipped his brush into the paint, the colours swirling together with a faint, familiar shimmer. And as the first stroke met the canvas, it seemed to glow with a golden light, as if guided by the warmth of a tiny dragon who still breathed in every dream.